Are your results from social media disappointing for your startup? Are you overwhelmed trying to get positive outcomes for your business? Today's episode is an interview with social media specialist Elizabeth Greenberg, addressing these issues and more.
Our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast addresses tools and concepts that are useful for the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Welcome, Elizabeth Greenberg, aka Betta for friends. And Betta and Ryan are both former students of mine. As a matter of fact, I believe you were in college and knew each other during your college careers.
That's right.
We sure did.
So I bet you each have some dirt on each other. And I would wager Betta has more dirt on Ryan than the other way around.
I was a great college student, immaculate. No dirt
Yes.
to be had.
Yes, you were pristine. So we've asked Betta to join us, talk a bit about social media, which we'll get into the details of the topic in a moment. But Betta, if you could just give a brief background of yourself so the audience knows who they're listening to.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me today. I was a student of Professor Palin, and I think I maybe hold a record for most courses taken with you while at Elon University. Following that experience, I was inspired to the point where I launched my own venture immediately after undergraduate school and joined a startup accelerator connected to the University of Chapel Hill in North Carolina. Worked on that while I was building that, co-founded a marketing consultancy and worked specifically in digital marketing with clients in healthcare, aviation, real estate, consumer products, and all sorts of different industries on getting their companies started and building out their marketing efforts. From there, I closed the one startup, kept that consultancy, ended up with a marketing agency as well, just to kind of round out that skill set going forward. And then eventually made my way back up north. Who knows why? It's freezing here. We're expecting snow in a few days. And ended up in the education space, working on, again, marketing and overlapping a little bit with sales there before getting my MBA, and then joining another startup in the cybersecurity space as they go through this rapid growth period. I'm at the helm of their marketing department right now.
And congratulations on the MBA.
Thank you.
And Ryan, no pressure on you.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, that's too big of a resume for me to follow.
Come on, you can keep up.
Yeah. Good luck. We'll talk in 10 years. If you stop doing everything now, I might. For people listening, the topic should be fairly obvious from what you've just run through. We're here to pick your brain, get your expertise on social media for startups. What can they do? What should they avoid? How to use it effectively? And how to avoid the headache that it can really be.
Sounds great to me.
We'll start with an easy question for you. How can startup entrepreneurs make the most of social media? How can they make it effective for them?
It's such a huge topic, and there are so many different avenues that we could go into, but I always like to think about things in threes. One, it's easy for me. I'm a list person, so it's easy. It's all on one page. But another reason is because the human brain loves things in threes. So it's easy to remember. It's easy to follow. So when we think about making the most out of social media, I want to break it out into three segments or three parts. The first is really knowing who your audience is and understanding the platforms. For this one, I think we all fall into that trap of, I understand Facebook from my experience as a user, so now I know everything about Facebook. And the same can be said about Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, wherever you're on. It's really important when you're looking at it from a business perspective to really understand the platform, who the users are, where they are, how they interact with it, so that you can really plan for that and know that you're on the right platform and in the right place from a business and marketing perspective. And the other piece is the know your audience, right? You've likely done a business plan. Maybe you've started your marketing plan and somebody has inevitably asked you, who is your target audience and what are the personas that represent the different groups within your target audience. And if they haven't, please find someone to ask you that question, because that's a hugely important piece of it. But it's really, if you know your audience, you can then answer the question of, okay, what platform do I want to be on? And since you've done the research to identify who uses what platform and how and all of that, you can say, all right, A plus B here, they go together. And that helps you really be selective in terms of what platform you're choosing. So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is to have a plan and be strategic. It is so easy with social media to say, oh, I know how to use social media. Let's just start posting, right? And that may get you up to 50 followers or a couple likes. The friends, families, and fools round. We talk about that in terms of funding. That's kind of where your starting point is with social media. And that's totally fine. You want that group of people to just get you started at the beginning, but you want to have a plan and really be strategic with your social media efforts. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that you only have a limited amount of time. And if you're a one human show, or even 2 or 3 people, you don't have a lot of time. And social media takes up a surprising amount of time. We know right now for what we're doing, we're building out our team that's solely focused on marketing. And we have one person that's dedicated to social media, and that is her entire job. So be very aware of your time and what you have. And if you have a plan, you can do that, right? It's not going to become overwhelming. It's not going to become something you forget about. It's just going to be built into your plan. The other piece is consistency. So if you think about any ad campaigns that you've seen from larger companies, you don't remember them after the first time you see the campaign. You're maybe like, oh yeah, there was that campaign with the gecko, but I don't really know what it's from. The second time you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that's an insurance company. The third time you're like, oh yeah, that's the Geico gecko and they do insurance. And maybe you use them, maybe you don't. But it does take a couple of times for people to remember things, put the pieces together, connect your name to whatever advertising campaign or marketing messaging you're putting out there. So you need to be consistent, right? You need to be showing up in front of people. And just like I said, I like things in 3s. That's kind of the magic number when it comes to marketing. You want your campaigns running for 3 months. You want to make sure that you have things showing up consistently in front of people. And then the last piece about it is that you can't measure something that doesn't have a plan, right? The whole throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks method. Okay, maybe you can call it A/B testing if you want, but you can't measure it, right? You don't have all of the variables in line. If we go back to a science project, or I'm sure later we'll get into analytics, but you really want to be able to measure it so you know what's working, what's not, and you can reevaluate, pivot, and move forward from there. So in terms of having a plan and being strategic, you want to be wary of your time. You want to make sure you're consistent with your posting efforts so that people hear you, remember you, start to get to know you. And then you also want to make sure that with that plan, you can measure your results and then pivot and adjust as needed to go with what's actually working for you. And the last thing, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but is tracking and measuring your results. So a lot of times the social platforms themselves have analytics capabilities and tracking, and those are a great place to start just looking at, seeing how you're doing. And with that, it'll help you really organize your posts into actual campaigns. So if you've done the work for planning, it's no problem. Everything's already in a campaign, and you can track, all right, for this product, this is what we've done on this campaign that spanned from January through the end of March, let's say, and you can see what worked. Did our Instagram stories perform better than the Instagram posts? Do people like video content more than image content? But you can see that. You can actually measure and track that. So then when you go to plan the next one, you take that information, you use it, you get better results the next time, and it just keeps compounding. And then the last piece under tracking and measuring your results is determining what those key performance indicators are. So a lot of people will say, I have 5 million followers. That's fantastic. If 20 of them engage with you, it's not impressive, right? It's more impressive if you say, I have 500 followers and 375 of them are actively engaging with my content. That's impressive. So instead of looking at how many followers I have or how many likes I have, yes, people are taking an action to support your social posts and your social profiles, but they're not really converting into customers or prospective customers, depending on what your goal is for your social posting. So you really want to make sure that you determine, okay, what metrics matter the most to me and my business based on my goals for social media. And that also boils down to just knowing why you're on the platform. What are you trying to get out of it?
Well, that's an excellent process and plan for a startup entrepreneur to address social media. With a follow-up to that, we always know that plans don't always work. What pitfalls should the startup entrepreneur be expecting to come across to them, and how can they prepare to deal with that pitfall?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the number one thing is just trying to be too many places at once. A lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, when I started out, get really excited about what we have and we want everybody to know about it, which is awesome. Keep that excitement level. But like I said, your time is limited. So you might go and open profiles or create profiles on all of these social platforms and be like, yes, I'm going to do this here, and I can just repost this stuff here, and it's going to be no problem at all. And then you run out of time. And then maybe you have one profile that's really active, but if somebody is searching for your business, if you've pitched your company somewhere and they're looking you up, they're going to only see that one active profile and then a bunch of kind of dormant ones that don't have a lot of activity. The first thing I would say is be very conscious that if you're listening to this and you say, you know what, I can do it. I still believe that I can be on all of these platforms. And I believe that my audience is on all of these platforms and all of them fit. Be ready, 1-2 months in to reassess and say, okay, do I have time to do all of these well? Was my assumption that my audience is on all of these platforms correct? You might find other things with that kind of reevaluation. You might find other things popping up where these platforms might be great for prospective employees if you're in that growth stage when you're looking to hire talent. And then other platforms might be more prevalent for kind of your customers. That's where you kind of have to reassess and say, all right, where is my time best spent so that I can do each one of these platforms really well? Another one is posting inconsistently. That's a huge one. And having that plan, working within a marketing calendar, even if it's just a simple Excel spreadsheet, will help with that inconsistency. But when you post inconsistently, people don't know when to check in. You're not kind of top of mind or front of mind. So if you've had a conversation with someone, they've followed your accounts, but you don't post for a month later, you're not going to get that reminder. You're not going to get that, oh, aha, I just talked to them. This is their profile. Oh, they're sharing this new concept or an event or whatever it is that you're sharing. Maybe I should share that, right? You're not getting that compounded growth from a person meeting you, interacting with you, following you, and then sharing your content and engaging with you online. Because that's what you're really looking for with social, right? You're looking to take those one-off conversations or smaller meetings and extend the reach that you have with your startup so that more people can know about you, learn about you, and then share what you have to offer and the value that you're bringing. So consistency or posting inconsistently rather will really shoot you in the foot. And it just goes back to you want to do it well, right? Do few things well instead of trying to do everything all at once. And then the last thing we talked about, not allocating enough time. Avoid that specific pitfall just by being honest with yourself, right? Reassess, reevaluate. We talk about pivoting all the time. When one thing doesn't work, we kind of pivot, move on to the next, right? There's always plan A through Z. Usually it's not a failure, right? It's not a bad failure to realize I don't have enough time to do all of this. What that forces you to do, though, is really dive in deep and see, am I marketing? Am I sending my message out in the right places? Having the plan is great. And then also, if you have a plan and you realize that maybe you can't accommodate that original plan, it's easy to change it, right? It's really easy to move things around. It's not so easy to rethink an entire concept or plan or strategy. Definitely start with that plan, and then just know there's going to need to be reevaluation periods. We're going to have to be really honest with ourselves, and we're likely going to fail at a few things before we find the right ingredients for our social strategy.
I feel like as you're talking through those, that's a lot of the conversations I have about where people have sort of gone off the rails and where the frustration has started, is the lack of the really solid foundation that you're really talking about there. Having said that, what are some tools and resources that people can use to help them be organized, help them stay on this plan?
Yeah, for sure. There's a ton of content out there that can really help guide you. The number one creator of said content would be HubSpot. It's a really great resource. They have free trainings, tutorial videos that are really good quality, consistently updated. And they also have downloadable templates, forms, worksheets that you can do to kind of help you think through and walk through all these things. I would say that's a really great resource. I didn't mention this in the pitfalls, but a lot of times people don't do their homework. We get excited. We want to share our ideas, but we don't do that research piece of it to really understand, is this the right route for me? HubSpot offers a lot of tools, a lot of free tools that kind of just get you up to speed. Even if you are a social media user, I'd recommend doing the homework, doing that research, just because social media for a business use case is a lot different than social media for your friends or your family. That's a really great resource. There are a ton of free and paid scheduling applications that you can use. I've personally used CoSchedule, Buffer, Hootsuite, and Tailwind. There are tons out there. And I will say, just do your homework there too, because they're also tailored to different platforms. So for example, Tailwind is one that I used because the startup I had was focused on consumer products, and that particular scheduling platform supported Pinterest, and Pinterest was a platform that made a lot of sense for us to be on. So really do your homework on the different platforms. I am not sponsored by any of them, so I do not have a preference.
That's next.
But just for my personal use, and then most of those platforms have really great blogs as well. Sprout Social, Social Media Examiner are another two resources that have great blog content. I'm very much a bite-sized reader, so I like the kind of longer form blogs where you can get enough from them, but you don't have to commit to a novel or a full book to kind of get the gist of it.
Well, that's quite a litany of very valuable information. And many questions came across my mind as you were speaking. If you don't mind, I'd like for both Ryan and I for an opportunity to ask some very specific targeted issues. And I have my first question. It's really two rolled into one. Let's say, for example, someone's done their homework and they've identified Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter is the platforms where their customers are. Should they be addressing all three? Is there a maximum number? And then within those accounts, our listeners probably all have personal accounts on those platforms. Should they use their personal one or create a separate platform for each with their business identity?
Yeah, so I'll kind of flip that in reverse order and start by saying definitely make one for your business. You can definitely share your business posts on your personal profiles, but definitely make one for your business. Hopefully you'll grow and eventually get to a point where you have someone managing your social media accounts. Then you don't want them logging into your personal profile all the time and having all that information. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons to have a separate business account on each of the platforms. I think I understand the question in terms of, should you be posting the same content on all the platforms? Was that the direction of the question?
Yes. And also, is there a minimum number of platforms or a maximum number you should be on?
Yeah. The minimum and maximum, I would say you only want to be where your customers are. That's the first kind of gate to get through, to say, all right, here's all of my social media platforms. Where are my customers? And then you want to ask yourself, okay, how much time do I have to give to these platforms? What can I handle? We didn't really talk about video a lot and video content. That's a place that is highly popular, a great way to market on social media, but hugely time consuming. I'll go on a tangent a little bit and tell a story. I worked with a group of high school students. When I was ending that role and leaving, they had asked me over and over again, can you do a TikTok dance with us? Will you do a TikTok dance with us? And I said, no, I'm not a TikTok dancer. They always kept asking. So when I was leaving, and it was around the same time that the pandemic hit, so I couldn't tell them in person that I was going to be leaving. I wasn't working on the project anymore. So I looked up a TikTok dance that was really popular. And I said, you know what? I'm going to learn it for these kids as kind of a farewell. And that's what I did. And I will tell you, it took me maybe 3 hours just to learn the dance. And that doesn't even count how many takes I had to do, and then setting it up and making sure the music was right, creating the pose, posting it, sharing it. So I will say video is a huge endeavor to take on. So if you're like, TikTok is where it's at for my clients, that's where I should be, just know that's going to take a lot of time. Even if you're fluent in TikTok, so to speak, it's still a lot of time, like a lot between editing, recording, all of that. So that's really going to narrow it down a bit more for you. And then to the first piece of that question, in terms of what you should be posting, it really should match the platform. So for example, just on a graphic level, right? Instagram loves square photos, square videos. Facebook loves fat horizontal photos, or maybe you can get away with some kind of infographic content, but they don't like things too long, right? The best, what you see the most, a typical Facebook photo is a little bit thicker, a little bit longer, a little bit thicker. And then Twitter loves you to be succinct, very succinct. And they got a little soft and they let you go beyond 140 characters, which I still think it was better when it was shorter. But still, they have a limit. So you should definitely be adapting your posts and creating variations for each platform, right? Because an Instagram user is looking for one thing. They're looking for that immediate, I understand what you're talking about, through an image. Facebook, you can either go the image route, but there's also more conversation. They like a little bit of a meatier intro to your image or whatever you're sharing, so that there can be more conversation on there. And Twitter is like, I want it now. I want to read it fast and I want to know what you're talking about. And that one also has a shorter lifespan. So a tweet's lifespan will be seconds, whereas a Facebook post lifespan will probably be the longest out of the three. And then an Instagram post lifespan, might be that day or half of the day. That goes back to really understanding the platform, who's on it, what are they looking for, and then tailoring your message to fit each.
Before Ryan asks his next question, though, I'm sure he is wondering, because look in his eyes while we're videoing, he wants to know, is that dance still online and how will we access it?
I realized as I was telling that story that I was probably putting my foot in my mouth there.
Yeah. That's too funny. Yeah, you said you were going to send some materials over. The link to that would be helpful. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I had a twinkle in my eye. I kept looking at you and the smile on your face. I think we've gotten a homework assignment. Professor Palin making a TikTok dance has to be something we accomplish.
Oh, I think that would go viral for sure.
I Are you trying to get TikTok shut down?
Yeah, there we go. You're talking about friends and family, though. I mean, as many students, as long as he's being a professor, his reach has got to be pretty impressive at this point. We might be something we need to consider.
For the right price, I'd do it.
There we go. There we go. Sell your soul to the social media devil.
We'd have to figure out between the three of us of how do I monetize this?
So on a more serious note, as you're going through this, one of the things that really stood out to me, and you did mention it a couple times, is how do you measure the results? Like, what are there analytical tools? Is there a measure of engagement for these platforms? Because we've all seen either fake accounts or accounts that just have 1 million followers and then don't seem to have much genuine content behind it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why earlier I pointed out the audience size, kind of one of those fluff metrics, because you don't really get a lot out of it. What the individual platforms will do is tell you your audience size, the number of likes, the number of shares, number of comments. And depending on how robust their analytics platform is, you might get like what time of day you reach more people and things like that. I actually use HubSpot and their CRM system, which also has blog hosting and is also a social media scheduling tool. They'll connect it to ad campaigns as well. They'll show us traffic similarly to what Google Analytics might show you from your website. They'll show you how many people navigated from your social media pages to your website. It'll show you things like views versus clicks versus submissions. If you're working on a specific campaign related to an event or a sale or like that, you definitely want to have call to action buttons, or you'll hear them referred to as CTAs. You'll see the conversion rates for those. So what percentage of people actually clicked on that CTA and then did what you wanted them to do, right? Whatever that call to action was, they did that action. So there are a ton of metrics, depending on what you're using, that you can really drill down into. For some businesses, and depending on what your goal is, the ones that are important are going to change, right? It's going to be different for everybody. The ones that are converting into customers, or the ones that are at least converting into contacts, that's going to be where you really want to pay attention. And then for us also, we look at, for example, shares. So that tells me that we've put out a piece of content that somebody has deemed enough of a value add to them put it on their platforms and share with their audience. That just extends your reach so much more. It's really knowing what you're using the social platforms for. And even your goal might be different based on social platforms. So it's not what's my goal for social media marketing necessarily. It's what's my goal on LinkedIn? What's my goal on Instagram? Because those might be very different, right? For us, as a B2B company, we use Instagram purely as a social tool for people to kind of get to know our company, more of a brand awareness, and our employees engage a lot on there. So we're not tracking the same thing on Instagram that we are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where our customers are and where they're engaging with us in kind of the more nitty-gritty tech speak and all that kind of stuff. On LinkedIn, we're really looking at those conversion metrics, whereas on Instagram, we're happy with likes and comments are great. We love having that interactive conversation there. That's another piece, is just knowing what's your goal in order to understand what you should be tracking.
A number of years ago, I believe it was before both of you were one of my students, I was a judge at a Stanford Social Entrepreneurship Business Plan competition. And one of the other judges was Jonathan Abrams. Now, if our audience doesn't know who Jonathan Abrams is, he was the founder of Friendster, which was pre-MySpace, which was pre-Facebook. And that goes back to 2002. I've watched the rapid change from social media of what's hot, what's developing. How would you recommend someone staying up with the constant explosive changes of social media? Should they be continually looking at analytics in researching, or should it be observational? What advice would you have to keep up with this rapid change in social media?
It's such an interesting question, especially right now with all the discussion around Twitter since Elon Musk purchased the company. we're at one of those times where people are starting to look at, all right, what are other platforms out there that are like Twitter that we can go to because we don't love the direction that Twitter's going right now. It just goes back to following your audience, right? If your audience is no longer on a platform, if it's not bringing you the returns that you're expecting or that you've seen in the past, that's when it's time to reevaluate and assess, does it make sense for us to spend time and potentially money if you're advertising on the platforms to stay here, or should we allocate it elsewhere? What I've always done is weekly check-ins, say, all right, I'm expecting X amount of contacts or conversions from this platform and X from here. So I check in weekly and see how we're doing. I compare it week over week just because the social media has such a short lifespan. That's a good way to keep a finger on the pulse, start to catch things earlier. I also do quarterly reviews, looking at, all right, how have we done this past quarter compared to the previous one? And then I'll also do a year end and see how we've done. And that's where you can kind of start seeing the larger trends and be able to kind of reevaluate and reassess. So from a time frame perspective too, I'm just finishing up our 2023 calendar. So we're in mid-November. I would say we're about halfway to 2/3 of the way through planning for 2023. If you have that regular check-in with those metrics and you're following how your accounts are performing and what's bringing a return to your business, then you can start making those decisions and see, all right, yeah, Twitter was really great for us, but maybe since the acquisition or the change of ownership, we're losing our audience on that platform. And then you choose to leave it, and maybe you choose just to drop it and not replace it, right? You don't necessarily have to replace a platform. With the example of moving from MySpace to Facebook, that was kind of a natural progression. It just naturally happened. But right now, if you listen to the news or go online, people will be spitballing, oh, this is another platform, or maybe Discord, or maybe this other platform that's kind of like Twitter. Is it really worth your time at this point? You're in that startup phase. Is it really worth your time to jump in on one of those platforms? Or probably the better option is to keep a finger on the pulse of your audience, your target audience, and be where they are, because nobody else matters in your marketing messaging. It's just your target audience.
So a little bit more of a specific question here. We've talked about following that audience. How do you do that? How do you figure out who's on what platform?
So there are a lot of resources out there, a lot of research that you can do in terms of who's on what platform. I've mentioned HubSpot a lot. They have a lot of really great free research. A lot of the social companies will also publish research reports, and organizations like Gartner and McKinsey, they'll all do kind of annual reports and looks into things. There's a lot of content available online to help you sift through that information and figure it out. I guarantee you, if you Google who uses Facebook or the average audience member for Facebook, you'll see a lot of really great resources, and just check the date. That's the only thing I will say there to help guide you there. Going back, hopefully you've done those personas, you've built out. We have, for example, a technical Tom, and what he likes to read, and kind of his general age range and all that kind of stuff. And then how he uses the internet, what he likes to use, what social platforms. A good umbrella place to start. Age is a great discriminator on social media. It really helps to inform. Predominantly, the audience on TikTok skews much, much younger than, for example, the audience on Facebook. So age is a great place to start. There are also companies that maybe their audience doesn't make sense for them to have an Instagram profile, but they still advertise on Instagram. So there's a lot of nuances to it, but I would just say going to the information provided by each of the social platforms is a good starting point. All of the resources that we talked about earlier have their own research into who is on these platforms and what they like and what they prefer. Then also there are always reports coming out every year from the larger research firms that go into a little bit more detail in terms of who's on each platform and how that's changed over the year and what they expect or forecast to happen in the next 1, 3, or 5 years.
It's interesting. Much of our conversation has been about the positive side of social media, the branding, customer acquisition. I was on a flight. It was in between flights at JFK, loads of fun. And I ran into a problem that needed to be resolved, and I only had a 2-hour layover. And I thought calling them is going to be useless. So one of the few times I ever tweet was I just tweeted the complaint with the hashtag of the airline, and it was resolved within a half hour because they have staff monitoring the negatives. Is that reasonable for a startup? Because that's a lot of time. We talked about the time intensiveness. How much should they pay attention to the negative comments on social media?
That's something that you really want to pay attention to and kind of respond to and handle in a very strategic way. Twitter specifically is notoriously used by companies for customer service. A lot of companies will actually have a couple Twitter accounts. So one Twitter account for the company and like general news posting, and then they will have one Twitter account dedicated to complaints, customer service related issues or comments or anything like that. The negative piece of it that you need to pay attention to so that you can help steer the conversation. You don't want to respond to them and shut down someone's negative comment or lash out. That's definitely not the way to handle that. But it does give you the opportunity to show a wider audience your character. And if somebody publishes a negative comment, whether it's a tweet or a post, or they comment on one of your posts with something negative, that will, one, highlight possibly an area that you need to focus on. Maybe it was your bad, right? And you didn't realize something. So it highlights an area that kind of needs your attention. But two, it also gives you the opportunity to respond and say, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry you had that experience. That's not our intention. That's not our hope. Here's how we're going to help. Like, let us help you fix it. Like, let us do right by the situation. And by doing that, it says a whole lot more about your company, what you value and what you stand for. And that will take you so far, because a lot of people will remember the negative experience that they have versus the one negative will outweigh the 20 positive experiences and interactions that they've had. So if you can take that negative experience and say, it's valid, we are sorry, humans make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Here's how we're going to fix it for you. And we really hope, depending on the situation, you'll craft your messaging in a way that's appropriate. But it is important to pay attention to the negative comments, and hopefully you don't get a lot of them. But if you choose to use a social platform for customer service related feedback, comments, that's definitely something you want to monitor. You can set up alerts for hashtags or comments like that. And that's what I would say if you want to set a customer service hashtag so that you can then track that hashtag using one of the tools we've already talked about. And it can ping you whenever somebody does that. And depending on the size of your audience, I think it's feasible, but you may very well reach a point where it's not feasible for just you and the 2 other people, or however many, your small team, to manage that. You're going to get negative comments, negative feedback, and just respond to it in a way that represents your company values, and it'll go really, really far.
Yeah, that's great. I feel like the social media can be the masses, right? You got to keep a hand on it. I liked when you said steer the conversation. So you can kind of maybe use it to highlight a positive aspect, but keep that control before it can kind of get away from you.
Absolutely. Our founder actually loves saying nobody got fired for over communicating. Nobody is going to beat down your door and spew negative comments online about you for over communicating about how you're going to solve a problem. That's just a really great takeaway in terms of thinking about negative feedback or maybe negative situations. Over communicate versus under communicate there.
Makes sense. We've talked a lot about the time commitment to doing this. And obviously, if you're a solo entrepreneur or part of a small team, how important that time is. The other big one is money. Everyone's been on these social media platforms. A lot of people listening to this will have started some sort of a business account. And it's very obvious that these companies make money on the platforms, and they encourage you to spend money on the platforms for advertising through it or paying for different aspects of the platform. How necessary is that? Can you use social media for the free aspect, or do you have to be running some sort of monetized campaign?
So now we're getting into kind of fun but murky waters.
Sure.
And I would say yes. I would say you can start out unpaid, and that's what I would recommend. Don't jump into paying for ads and boosting posts and everything right off the bat, right? Start with no money in. Your time is your investment in your social media strategy right at the beginning. Go through that process, right? Because like we've said, you'll probably have to reassess, maybe pare down the number of platforms you're on or you've committed to. And then once you analyze your results, watch those metrics, look at what your audience is doing, you'll start seeing patterns in terms of, okay, these platforms are getting us more engagement and more quality engagement, right? We're seeing more people who become customers. Either they buy our product or they set up a phone screen or they start our process to purchase our service, whatever it is. If you're seeing more and more people like that engaging on that platform, that's the point where you can say, okay, what would happen if we start investing a little bit of money into this platform? And what I would say is start with a testing mindset. Don't go full throttle, throwing the whole piggy bank at a social platform. Think about what makes sense to you. So for example, the company that I'm working with now, been on social for a while. And we said, you know what, we're going to start putting all of our webinars and prospect events on LinkedIn. And we're going to start doing ads connected to those events. And that made sense for us. We're a B2B company, B2B service company. So it made sense for us to say, all right, we're getting a lot of interactions on LinkedIn. Those interactions are coming from either current clients or prospective clients. We're going to see what happens when we put out this ad. The first time we did it, we set a really low budget. We're like, we just want to see what happens. It more than doubled the attendance to our webinar the first time. And we're like, okay, so positive experience so far. Let's see if we put a little bit more into this campaign. But it is connected to a campaign, right? For us, it's an event campaign. It could be a piece of content. If you have an ebook or research report or white paper, I'm talking LinkedIn right now, those all make sense, right? For an ad campaign, if you want to extend that reach. The other thing I really liked is the targeting aspect. So again, know your audience. Now you get to know them really, really well, because on all of these platforms, you are able to really target the audience. If we're talking about a TikTok or an Instagram, that's a different kind of type. TikTok is a whole different type of advertising and paid advertising. That's a lot of brand promotion and brand placement. So whether you're sponsoring a challenge or boosting content, I think there are about 5 different ways you can advertise on TikTok. And then Instagram, product-based companies choose to do promoted posts, promoted content. Or another way of kind of putting money into a social media channel is working with influencers or micro influencers. That can get into either working directly with them, working through a service that connects your campaign with influencers they deem appropriate. There are a lot of different ways that you can put money into a channel, but I would say wait until you see it performing well for you, and then look at where it makes sense to put money in, and make sure that if I'm putting X in, I'm expecting Y to come back to me. So we're going back to being able to measure the results. So if you're saying, all right, one of my customers or one purchase gets me X amount of dollars, if I put Y dollars into this campaign, then I need to have at least Z purchases to make it worthwhile. It's super simple, right? It's a super simple math equation, and it's overlooked so often because you start looking at reach and impressions and audience sizes. And it's really fun and exciting when those are huge numbers. But what matters is, are you putting the money in and getting more out of it? That's really why you're advertising. Long story short, wait to see what's working for you, then do more research from there, And then once you're sure that that's the right place to advertise whatever it is, whether it's an event or a product, then start to test the waters. Start with kind of a smaller daily budget, tweak and grow from there. If you start seeing returns, or a lot of the platforms will recommend a certain budget. I know Google Ads does this, but LinkedIn will also do it too, where they'll say, this is your budget, but if you spend this, statistically, you'll get this much more. Use those as guides as well and see what's working for you.
My mind was also going on the concept of pay for play, but with most startups, they don't have the ability to pay at the beginning. And I was thinking in terms, from listening to you, we know that social media is a global phenomenon, but what about a startup that is solely local association without pay for play? What strategies should they use with social media just to address a local market?
So assuming you're not selling online, so you don't have that wider audience, social media, there are a lot of channels that also have very targeted local groups. For example, on Facebook, I'm a member of 3 or 4. I have a neighborhood group, I have a town group, I have a business group, and it's all based in town. I'm part of the Chamber of Commerce group. If you're really working on that local level and you're just looking to stay on that level or in that kind of region, looking at targeted groups, LinkedIn has the same thing. Those 2 platforms kind of make it easy for you to target. Don't just join the groups, right? Engage with them. Be an active voice in those communities so that people can see that you are trying to provide value and they can understand what the value add is for their life and maybe their business, however it makes sense based on what your business is. For platforms like Instagram, there are typically hashtags that'll focus you into a certain region. So that's a really great way to get the attention of local people who might be following those hashtags. And then there are always local bloggers and local influencers. So I mentioned micro influencers before. There are a ton of bloggers in my town specifically that write and post about things like fashion and interior design and even construction and all sorts of different things. Connecting with those and being on a local scale, it's not such a daunting task to individually connect with some of those people and start engaging with them. The nice thing about local is people want to see members of their community succeed, right? They want to support you and help you. So that's a really great way to kind of use social locally and then also support others in your community, right? It's not all about you shouting out to the world who you are and what you do, but also engaging with other people, supporting their endeavors, celebrating their wins and successes. And then people start seeing you as that team player, that community player, and then they'll be more likely to kind of promote your posts and celebrate your successes and wins.
Before we wrap up, I do have one quick question for you with a follow-up question to Ryan. You mentioned at the onset that you believe you hold the record for most courses taken under my guidance. What's your number?
Oh gosh, I think I don't know specifically. It's either, I want to say 5 or 6, I think.
Ryan, what's your number?
Yeah, I think it's 5. I'm really not sure. It's too many is the answer that I'm really looking for.
You just both devalued your reputation. You're both gluttons for punishment. We've learned this.
That's exactly right.
Well, we can call it a tie.
Thank you very much, Betta. There's a litany of really good quality information, and you validated why you're our go-to person for social media.
Of course. Always happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to Our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and others to get the most up-to-date information as it's released.